So news coming fast and furious if you've been holding on to your seats in the last hour or so on those two fronts. We're going to get to Mueller news in just a moment, but first we're going to start with Acosta. That headline breaking at the top of our show, the Labor Secretary announcing his resignation following criticism of his handling about a decade ago of the Jeffrey Epstein case. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with more. Hi, John.
That was quite a surprise this morning, Julie. When we saw the president coming out with Alex Acosta, we assumed that he was going to offer him a measure of support. But then when the president said, I hate what I'm about to hear, we thought, Acosta looks like he's going to resign. Acosta said that he did not want the Epstein case to become a distraction from the work that was being done at the Labor Department and by this administration at large. So he was stepping down. The president said he watched his press conference the other day, thought that he did quite well, that he explained himself very well. So I put the question to the president that if you thought Acosta did okay during that press conference, why the need for him to step down? Here's his response.
There is no need at all, as far as I'm concerned. This is a person that I've gotten to know. There hasn't been an ounce of controversy at the Department of Labor until this came up. And he's doing this not for himself. He's doing this for the administration. And Alex, I think you'll agree. I said, you don't have to do this. He doesn't have to do this.
The president said that he was willing to live with Acosta still being at the Labor Department and with Epstein swirling around, figuring that eventually it would go away. But he said Acosta felt that with so many things going on that were positive in the Labor Department and across the administration, that he did not want to distract from that. The president also put a little more meat on the bones on a statement that he made a couple of days ago where he said that he and Jeffrey Epstein, the accused sexual predator, had a falling out. In 2011, an attorney named Bradley Edwards made a court filing in Palm Beach County in which he alleged that President Trump threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago for sexually assaulting a female employee there. When he was on with Dana Perino a couple of days ago, the famous author James Patterson said that President Trump threw Epstein out of the club. And today, President Trump confirmed, yes, he did kick Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. Listen here.
Jeffrey Epstein was not somebody that I respected. I threw him out. In fact, I think the great James Patterson, who's a member of Mar-a-Lago, made a statement yesterday that many years ago I threw him out. I'm not a fan of Jeffrey Epstein.
Not a fan of Jeffrey Epstein. The president would not say why he threw him out, saying that the reason was not important. And with the Mueller hearing now appearing to be in flux, there are some members of the committee who have been told that his testimony is being postponed from the 17th to the 24th. Other members of the committee are saying, no, it looks like it's still on the 17th. The president didn't know about all of that, but he was asked about Mueller this morning on the way to the helicopter. Here's what he said about his potential testimony before Congress.
Well, I think how many bites at the apple do you get? We've gone through 500 witnesses. 2,500 subpoenas. I've let them interview my lawyers. I've let them in because I had nothing to do with Russia. Now that's come out. There was no collusion.
The president also had a couple of things to say about some other people. Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, after Ryan issued some complaints about the president said this morning, Paul Ryan was a terrible speaker. Frankly, he was a baby. He didn't know what he was doing. For him to be going out and opening his mouth is pretty amazing. I also asked the president whether he backed down on this idea of including a question about citizenship on the census by taking this other route that he announced yesterday. The president said, not only didn't I back down, I backed up. Anyone else would have given this up a long time ago. The president believes that aggregating data that's already in federal databases together with the census will provide a much more accurate picture of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal immigrants there are in this country than actually putting the question on the census. We'll see if that flies, Julie.
Let's see. Does anything really fly and then stick? We don't know.
Hey, there's a bunch of other stuff he talked about too. If you got another 30 45 minutes.
We'll allot that for the back half of the show, sure. John Roberts.
As we say, stand by,
boy.
John. For
Thank
more on
you.
this, I want to bring in Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. Chris, good morning to you. Just want our viewers to know, I'm hearing from a leading member on one of these committees. They are confirming with me that Mueller will do 3 hours of the Judiciary Committee and then 2 hours with Intel. If that stands on the 24th of July, that will be an extra hour. And if you look at the number of members on Judiciary, 41, that logic may serve. Nonetheless, our banner says in flux, and I think that's probably where it is right now. Your reaction on Mueller. Let's start there.
Well, did your source say use 3 hours, 2 hours on what day? This Wednesday or the following Wednesday?
The 24th of July, the following Wednesday.
Okay, well, I will tell you that I talked to a top staffer on the committee yesterday, and they were acting as if this was all set for this coming Wednesday, the 17th. So they seemed quite surprised. They certainly gave no indication that this was going to happen in 10 days rather than 4 or 5 days from now. Look, if it's just a delay of a week, it doesn't mean anything. I still think the whole question of whether or not Mueller testifies is very much in doubt. You had that interesting comment from the Attorney General, Bill Barr, earlier this week where he said if Mueller doesn't want to testify, the Department of Justice will stand behind him, call it a public spectacle. We know from his own words in that one public statement he made after the report was released that Bob Mueller really does not want to testify and says, all I'm going to tell you is what I already wrote in those 448 pages of the Mueller report. So we'll see whether or not he testifies. But the fact that it's being delayed a week is an indication does it still say? Yeah, it's still in flux, and I think it's still in doubt.
So Congress takes a break on the 26th of July, which will be that Friday, 2 days post July 24th. Now to Acosta, what do you make of the latest move today with the Labor Secretary stepping down in a week?
I don't know whether he jumped or he was pushed. Certainly he and the president put the best face on it today and said that this was just a selfless act by Acosta. But I have to tell you, there were an awful lot of people in Washington who didn't think there was any way Acosta was going to be able to survive this. Generally speaking, his press conference on Wednesday did not play to good reviews. Everybody ends up becoming a drama critic in these kinds of situations. You know, that he was very lawyerly. He didn't show a lot of heart or a sympathy, didn't apologize to the victims. You know, look, he's not the most important person of the administration. There were a lot of doubts about Alex Acosta already, a lot of frustration within the administration that he wasn't pushing hard enough on deregulating all the rules in the workplace. And the idea that, you know, it was on the front page of the Washington Post again today. It's not going away. Why do you want to have this trouble, have this obstacle by somebody that you're not crazy about in the administration and who is not a key player in the administration? It's not like we're talking about the Attorney General or Defense Secretary or Secretary of State. So he was expendable, whether that was transmitted to him or he simply came to that conclusion himself. My guess is some good reporters will figure it out over the course of the next day or so.
His quote was, focus needs to be on the economy. The right thing was to step aside. The president's going to be talking about the economy this afternoon in Wisconsin. What are you talking about on Sunday? Have you figured that out yet?
I can tell you as of right now, obviously one of the lead stories is going to be this tropical storm / possible Hurricane Barry. What's going to happen there? We're still trying to sort out. The president, despite what he said, he clearly backed down on putting a question in the census. The opportunity to just get this information from other agencies had been around as an idea for months. The president rejected it as recently as this week, and then he backed off that. And, you know, there's also the possibility of ICE raids on people in this country illegally who've gotten a final disposition that they have to leave the White House. No, not the White House, not the administration, the country, that there may be a raid of 2,000 of them in 10 cities across the country. That, and who knows what the next 48 hours may bring.
Set your alarm. Brother, you will not sleep. 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock here on the Fox News Channel. See you on Sunday morning, Chris. Thanks for being with us and have a great show.
Thank you, Bill.
You bet. Thank you.
Fox News alert, and now on to Tropical Storm Barry. As Chris just mentioned, the storm gaining strength in the Gulf of Mexico. Barry could actually become a hurricane before hitting the Gulf Coast tonight or tomorrow. And Casey Stiegel is live in New Orleans, and you can see the weather changing by the minute.
Yeah, Julie, conditions can deteriorate rather rapidly. And, let's go over some quick info first. To become a Category 1 hurricane, you have to have sustained winds of 74 miles per hour. Not gusts, they have to be sustained. If it's 73, it's still a tropical storm. At this point, the latest update from the National Hurricane Center, it's reaching wind speed gusts of hurricane level, but not sustained at this point. So the question is, will it make landfall as a Category 1 storm? If it does, we could have some pretty big problems because officials on the ground tell us it would be the first time in history that a hurricane has hit as the Mississippi River levels that you're looking at are still on the rise because it's so early in the season. You can see how high the water is, too close for comfort, nearing the top of that levee. Typically, the river is about 6 to 8 feet this time of year, but it is now 16, 17 feet in some spots. In the lowest lying areas, like over in parts of Plaquemines Parish, mandatory evacuation orders have been put into effect, though we have been told many residents are opting to stay and ride Barry out. But folks are racing around now, making these last-minute preparations. We've already been to a couple of gas stations where they're out of gasoline. If you go to the grocery stores, if you go to the 7-Elevens, the water shelves are empty, so people are certainly stocking up. They're boarding up, sandbagging, trying to do what they can to defend their property. We're now looking at more of a landfall being tomorrow morning in central Louisiana as opposed to the overnight hours. But now tomorrow morning is more what it's looking like at this point, Julie.
All right, Casey Stiegel in New Orleans. Thanks for watching it for us.
12 past. What happens with the Mueller testimony now? If there are still negotiations, what ultimately do they settle on? We'll talk to a top DOJ official about all that ongoing right now. Julie.
Plus, President Trump talking trade in Wisconsin today as Joe Biden slams his foreign policy as, quote, an embarrassment. Steve Hilton joins us on that next.
Staying entrenched in unwinnable conflicts drains our capacity to lead on so many other issues that require our attention. It prevents us from rebuilding the other instruments of American power.
Because the cruelty is manufactured. This is a manufactured crisis because there is no need for us to do this. There's no need for us to overcrowd and to detain and under-resource. There is no need for us to arrest innocent people and treat them no differently than criminals when they are pursuing their basic human rights.
Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez testifying along with two other progressive Democrats, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, as well as Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts just moments ago. We're going to continue to monitor that hearing and bring you any developments as they come.
What has been lost with the chest thumping and self-inflicted setbacks and the manufactured crises of this administration. Folks, American foreign policy, I think, has to be purposeful and inspiring, based on clear goals driven by sound strategies, not by Twitter tantrums.
That from Joe Biden here in New York City just yesterday, slamming the president on foreign policy. Biden also saying if elected, he would get us back in the Iran nuclear deal if Tehran comes back into compliance with that agreement. Steve Hilton, host of The Next Revolution here on Fox. How you doing, Steve? And good day to you. So he's making the case to voters. Now you got a choice. You can continue along the path of the Trump administration, or you can go back to the Obama-Biden years. What happens with that argument?
It just falls on the floor and dies, because basically this speech, and especially the reaction to it, Bill, just shows how stupid and superficial the establishment in this country is, the foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C., the media establishment, and all that was rejected back in 2016 is going to be rejected again, because what you see is that these people in the establishment, they are only concerned about style and not substance. So what you saw from Biden there was just a long list of all the buzzwords buzzwords that the establishment loves to hear, the international order, rules, and all this kind of stuff, and no attention on the actual substance. On the substance, the policy that he wants to go back to was weak on Russia, did nothing when Putin walked into Crimea and Ukraine, allowed him to do all his energy deals, was weak on Iran with a nuclear deal that allowed Iran to develop nuclear weapons, and above all was weak on China, our biggest geostrategic threat, and they didn't do anything to stand up to them. Donald Trump has reversed all of that. Tough on Russia, especially on energy, tough on Iran, now bringing them to the brink of disaster in their own country, and especially turning around the 50-year policy of sucking up to China and finally getting China's attention. So on substance, Donald Trump has done the right thing. Biden says all the right words, but gets praised just for that, regardless of substance. It's all a joke.
So he has shown his hand. Michael Waltz is a Republican from Florida. He's seen the hand that Biden's playing and said the following about that.
Joe Biden's problem is President Obama and the disaster that was their foreign policy. The near collapse of Iraq, the Iran deal, regime change in Libya, where that is still a disaster, doing nothing on North Korea, China marching across the South China Sea. These are all the problems that President Trump inherited, and we've seen real leadership and results since.
Making your point too, Steve, right along there. I would say, in summary here, if you stay out of war, if there's no new conflict, that's a foreign policy the president could sell to the American people in a re-election campaign. Go ahead.
Absolutely right. And that's what he's done, is the peace and prosperity agenda. But I do want to emphasize the point about how he is being strong. President Trump is being strong on these problems. The Obama-Biden regime ran away from the problems and put them off for another day, especially with those three I listed, Russia, Iran, and China. It's President Trump who's actually standing up, facing these problems with a strong response. Of course, that causes turbulence. Of course, people don't like it. But Americans like it because it's good for America.
We'll see you this weekend, Steve. Nice to see you today. Steve Hilton there with us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bill.
You bet.
New tensions in the Persian Gulf as Britain seizes an Iranian oil tanker. How Tehran is now responding. Next.
Days after the World Cup victory and the parade here in New York City, a member of the women's soccer team says that she was robbed in her hotel room in Los Angeles. Ali Long tweeting this. After the ESPYs show, someone stole my wedding ring, cash, and the key to my favorite city after just receiving it from my hotel room. Do you make copies at NYC Mayor? I would love a new one. End tweet. I think you should probably get that. Man. Ali Long is from Long Island, New York, 31 years old. That's a shame.
That's a real shame. What a downer.
Well, we get the cash back.
Where's the cameras? Where are the security cams?
Yeah, definitely get her a new key to the city.
Yeah, no, she'll get that back, but let's just hope she gets other stuff back as well. All right. A Fox News alert now. President Trump about to arrive in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he will later speak this afternoon about his proposed trade deal with Canada and Mexico. I'm joined now by Steve Gill, a former trade official with the Bush administration. No coincidence here. This happens one day after a slew of Democrats held town halls and speeches and meetings. They barnstormed the city. The president now heading to Milwaukee. The president's replacement for the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, has gotten a chilly reception from House Democrats. The president of the Wisconsin Fair Trade Coalition, I want your reaction on this, said that the president's proposal, quote, fails to make the changes needed to stop outsourcing jobs. Doesn't the president, his motto has always been keep the jobs here?
Well, and that's what this will do. This was one of President Trump's key promises on the campaign trail, that they would fix NAFTA, and that's what this NAFTA 2.0, this new and improved NAFTA will do. Mm-hmm. It will help the agriculture community, the automobile community. It will bring jobs back. And you had Mexico has already approved the deal. Canada's ready to do it. The only thing holding it up right now are the House Democrats. And frankly, they don't want to give President Trump a win, and they're willing to sacrifice a win for American workers to keep him from getting a political victory.
Here's President Trump on Twitter. Couple tweets on trade. When you are the big piggy bank that other countries have been ripping off for years to a level that is not to be believed, tariffs are a great negotiating tool, a great revenue producer, and most importantly, a powerful way to get companies to come to the U.S. and to get companies that have left us for other lands to come back home. He makes a good point there.
Well, and we're seeing that happen. Again, we look at the tariffs a lot of the times or taxes of what the U.S. is charging for goods and services to come here. But we've had a huge imbalance that President Trump has been pointing out as we send our goods and our services to other countries. And in some cases, it's the non-tariff barriers to trade that keep us out that are even worse than the taxes. We may have access to a market, but only if we jump through certain hoops that actually keep U.S. products out. So he's right. He's trying to level the playing field, and it's been unlevel for so long. As we raise our taxes, people complain, but we're already facing high taxes to get our goods into other countries.
Yeah, Wisconsin, by the way, we can't ignore the fact that it's a key 2020 state. In fact, Wisconsin was one of 3 Midwestern states that were part of a so-called blue wall for Democrats that voted, in fact, instead for Trump in 2016. He actually became the first Republican to carry Wisconsin in a presidential race since Ronald Reagan won the state, I think, in 1984. So how is economy and trade going to impact the race in 2020?
Well, I think, first of all, you're hitting exactly the right point. How does it play specifically in those battleground states, the Ohios, the Michigans, the Pennsylvanias, the Wisconsins? So you've got farmers in those states, you've got automobile manufacturers, you've got steel industry that's coming back. The way that the tariffs and the trade disputes will play in those states matters a lot more than what polls may say in New York or in California. I think the other big stumbling block right now is what happens with China. They've been trying to negotiate a China trade deal, resolve this trade dispute for a while. We've had our negotiators say we're 90% there. Well, if I jump off a building there in New York today, 90% of the way down, I'm going to be good. It's the last 10% that's always the toughest, whether it's in a negotiation or whether you're falling and plummeting off a building. So the last 10% is the hardest, and they're not just fighting over tariffs or non-tariff barriers. We're fighting with China over institutional barriers. We're talking about manipulation of currency, information technology. There are a lot of issues beyond just how many soybeans or cars or things get sold, and that's the hardest part of the deal, and why a lot of people are feeling that the prospects of a deal this year have perhaps dimmed in recent weeks.
All right, Steve Gill, thank you very much joining us on a very busy news day. I'm glad we got to talk about this. Thank you.
This is new from overnight, growing legal troubles for the Grammy-winning singer R. Kelly. The charges he is now facing after an arrest in Chicago.
And it will be must-see TV when Robert Mueller eventually testifies on Capitol Hill. But that time is apparently now in flux. Former DOJ official John Yoo weighs in on what to expect in that highly anticipated hearing. Next.
I wish we had more time, but I'm glad we had the time that we have.
For the leadership in this committee to decide that only certain members, and there's only time for certain members to be questioned, even on your side of the aisle, is just plain wrong.
Let them interview my lawyers. I've let them in because I had nothing to do with Russia. Now that's come out. There was no collusion.
President Trump on his way to Wisconsin last hour, weighing in on congressional testimony by Robert Mueller, which may or may not happen next week. We're still trying to figure that out. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington. Hi, Catherine.
Well, thanks, Julie. We've got a pretty exciting situation this morning because the information is really in flux, and it breaks down into 2 buckets of information. On the one hand, our contacts are reporting that the July 17th hearing has been postponed for a week, and these are people who have a need to know, and they're also handling things like logistics and security. And then the other bucket of information, we've got this new statement from the House Judiciary Committee, and this is the lead committee for the hearing next week. Pay attention to the fact that this statement issued this morning is extremely vague, and it does not mention Mueller by name. It says simply, quote, "At this moment, we still plan to have our hearing on the 17th, and we will let you know if that changes." None of this is happening in a vacuum because a lot of the issues surrounding the hearing came to a head last night because the current game plan violates a long-standing practice known as House Rule 11 that says every member gets 5 minutes to cross-examine the witness.
And that means that we have a hierarchical system, a system that's based on preferential treatment, quite frankly, by where you sit on the committee. It means if you're in the front row, I happen to be on the front row, I was just inches away from the back row. But it means that membership of this committee is not democratic, and we're not going to all be treated equally. But I know everybody here has questions.
House Judiciary and House Intelligence set aside 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon on the 17th. So listen to this exchange where Chairman Nadler just cannot explain how he's going to cut off Special Counsel Mueller's testimony when they bump up against that 2-hour time limit.
I'll pose the question, ask the chairman again if he would like to explain. How do you actually expect to stop the hearing next week?
I'm going to repeat what I said a few minutes ago. This line of discussion, frankly, is beyond the scope of this markup, and I'm not going to comment further.
There are two key things, I think, to take away from all of this. Number one is that the logistics are in flux, maybe three even. Number two, Mueller remains, based on our reporting, a very reluctant witness. And number three, both the Republicans and the Democrats are effectively up against a hard stop with that August recess. They've got to get the hearing in before the August recess because they're going to lose a lot of wind in their sails once they get to September.
All right. Catherine Herridge, thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. I want to bring in John Yoo for some analysis. Former Deputy Assistant AG in the George W. Bush administration, also Professor of Law, University of California, Berkeley. How you doing, John? Welcome back here. What do you make of the apparent start-stop of this hearing?
It's interesting. There's two things going on here. One is the committee needs Bob Mueller more than Bob Mueller needs them. He's in the driver's seat. It's pretty remarkable for a witness to come up and say, I'm only going to testify for 2 hours. That's all you get. We often see hearings where witnesses go on for hours and hours. A committee could have a hearing for a whole day if it wanted to. So that's putting enormous pressure on the people in the House to try to use the time most efficiently. Then the second thing going on is you're seeing people in the House, particularly on the Democratic side, being torn between trying to be good at oversight, asking Mueller why he did certain things, what he thinks about obstruction, what he thinks about impeachment, but then a very strong desire, especially amongst the youngest members, just to grandstand. If they were running things effectively, a lot of the time would be concentrated in just a few people who know the case best. But as you can hear, all 41 members of the Judiciary Committee want to have their 2 minutes because they want their sound bites in order to cut their campaign commercials.
Yeah, it's tough to get anything done in 2 minutes unless you really ask a pointed yes or no question. This is what I'm hearing. It could all change. Mueller's been punted for another week, 7/24, that Wednesday in July. He'll do 3 hours in the morning with the Judiciary Committee, that large committee you described of 41, and then he'll do 2 hours in the afternoon with Intel Committee. If that holds, and by the way, that would be 2 days before the summer recess that Catherine was just describing there. If that holds, does that sound like some sort of compromise to get this done, John?
Oh, yes, I think that the Mueller's, and again, he's the one who's calling the shots. He's happy to say, okay, I'll give you another hour. It's not going to make a big difference. I think Mueller's going to get up there and he's going to just stay within the four corners of his report. He's an old-style prosecutor. I think he's a man of great integrity. He's not going to try to throw out innuendos. He's not going to try to throw out suggestions. He's just going to say, this is what I wrote in a report. I think primarily what he's going up there for is because he clearly doesn't want to, is he wants to respond to attacks on his own integrity and the integrity of his investigation. But when it comes to, I think, House Democrats' efforts to get him to talk about obstruction and so on, I don't think he's going to say anything more than what's already in the printed report.
He has said that he'll stick to the report, 448 pages in length. What about the soundbite we just heard from Doug Collins, the Republican from Georgia? He was asking Jerry Nadler, how do you end the hearing? How do you conclude it? Why do you think that's important?
Again, it goes to this point that the younger members on the committee have a really strong desire to use this as a platform to make a political identity for themselves. And so they're going to constantly be trying to push up against that 2-minute deadline they have. The chairman is just going to have to gavel them shut. In fact, if the Republicans are smart, they're just going to let the Democrats have a food fight amongst themselves about who's going to be able to push themselves to the front of the line and ask the most questions, because it's going to be the chairman. The Democratic chairman is the one who's going to have to force his own Democratic members essentially to shut up.
To drop the gavel, right? Which may not be easy to do. John, terrific. Nice to see you. John Yoo with us today, and we'll see what we get, right? In the end. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bill.
Fox News alerts singer R. Kelly arrested on federal sex trafficking charges in Chicago. Kelly is already facing similar state charges in Illinois. Mike Tobin has the latest from Chicago for us. Hey, Mike.
And Julie, after spending the night in the federal lockup here in Chicago, the R&B singer R. Kelly is expected to make an appearance at the Dirksen Federal Building today. He's got an arraignment scheduled, according to the schedule anyway, at 1 o'clock. And after that, there's going to be a removal hearing, and that will focus on transporting the R&B singer to New York. The indictment out of the Eastern District of New York is different than what we've seen to date in the R. Kelly case because it focuses on racketeering, establishing his businesses, numerous assistants, bodyguards, and drivers as the enterprise. And the indictment essentially states that members of this enterprise would do things like round up girls from his concerts, and ultimately states that he used the enterprise to sexually exploit minors, force them into labor, and the indictment alleges that they were transported over state lines for the purposes of engaging in sexual activity. Among other claims made in the indictment is a claim that a minor was transported to New York for the purpose of sex and exposed without her knowledge to a sexually transmitted disease. The New York indictment is not confined to acts that took place in New York. It gets into acts alleged in California and Illinois as well. Now, the indictment from the Northern District of Illinois largely has to do with allegations that we have heard before. It focuses on 5 minor girls. It alleges they were coerced into sex, that child pornography was produced, and it gets into many allegations of how intimidation, coercion, payoffs, and gifts were used to get people to lie to investigators and the grand jury to cover up evidence, therefore obstructing justice. So the charges in the indictment from the Northern District of Illinois involve 13 counts, but the charges are child pornography, enticement of a minor, and obstruction of justice. What is different about the indictment out of the Northern District of Illinois is that it names co-defendants, specifically Daryl McDavid and Milton Brown, who apparently goes by the name of June Brown. And essentially, to cut to the chase, it alleges that these individuals were R. Kelly's enablers.
All right,
Julie?
Mike Tobin, thank you so much. Bill.
Yeah.
From overseas, Iran now with a stark warning for one of our strongest allies, calling on the UK to release an oil tanker. Now, will they, or should the U.S. step in? That's next.
We have asked our allies many times, we've talked about this from the podium, that we've asked our allies to ask Iran.
Brush fire forcing thousands to leave their homes on the Hawaiian island of Maui. Check that out. They're battling that blaze, already burning through 3,000 acres. Started along a highway yesterday morning. That fire also causing some flights to be diverted from the islands.
Yeah.
Big one.
So Iran is demanding the UK release a seized oil tanker. British Marines suspected it was in violation of European sanctions. Meantime, a spokesman for Iran's foreign minister says Britain is playing a dangerous game. Joining me now is Harry Kazianis, Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest. First of all, Iran is in violation of sanctions. The UK has every right to do what it's doing, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what Iran is doing is essentially trying to sell oil to Bashar al-Assad, the brutal dictator of Syria, who's responsible for killing millions of people. So what Iran has tried to do is essentially take an oil tanker, bring it through the Strait of Gibraltar, which is British territory, and Tehran should have realized that Britain was going to do this. This is no sort of, heinous act by Britain's part. They're just following international law. Iran is not, and they're in the wrong.
One would think Iran is asking for it because they've been playing these games, they've been throwing out threats, and they're doing it to try to release sanctions, but the U.S. is only going to toughen those sanctions. So talk about backfiring tactics. I mean, I can't imagine they could possibly do any more to provoke more sanctions to be hitting them where it hurts.
Well, that's exactly right. And what Iran is doing, if they're not careful, they're blazing a path to war, not with just the United States, but European allies. I mean, if Iran continues with this behavior, especially continuing to up their enrichment, to building more weapons like advanced missile systems, and just acting like a rogue regime, the United States is going to be pushed into a very tough position. But what I'm actually afraid of is that rogue elements within the Iranian regime would actually try to start a shooting war. And I think that's what we have to be careful of. And I think the American people need to watch this very, very carefully because it could end up being the hottest international crisis of our time.
No, it really is. And I mean, they continue to push the envelope with just last week saying, look, we're going to enrich as much weapons grade uranium as we want, and you're going to give us what we want. Get rid of the sanctions. That's not how it works. Here's the Iranian foreign minister. I want to put this up on the screen, have you react to this. The European Union sanctions are meant to stop Europe from buying Syria's oil. They are not about another country selling oil to Syria. Therefore, this is very childish and and ridiculous excuse by the British. They should officially announce that we are the servants of America and act on behalf of America. America has returned their favor well by insulting their ambassador and their prime minister. What in the world does that even mean, first of all? I mean, they are trying, as you mentioned earlier, to sell oil to the Assad regime. The whole idea is to stop them from helping Syria, and they continue to do so, and then they turn around and say that this is very childish and ridiculous excuse by the British?
It sounds like gibberish, to be honest with you. And I think what Iran is doing is essentially proving President Trump's point to get out of the Iran nuclear deal. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. The Iran deal wasn't horrendous, but what it did is it actually contained their program for about 10 years. Here's the problem. In 10 years, does anybody really think the Iranians would enter into a new deal? Also, the Iranians can continue developing more ballistic missiles. So the Trump administration realized, look, we can either leave this to the next president, or we can actually do the right thing and try to head this off now while Iran is not as strong as it could be. And I think the president made the right call.
Yeah, now there are a lot of war of words going between the Trump administration and Iran. The word war, first of all, nothing that the president has ever said has indicated he wants to go to war. He has talked about, military force, which is not necessarily war. It just means more military force in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz in order to prevent Iran from continuing to do what it has been